Coming to you live from an undisclosed, possibly stormy, definitely humid location in Boca Raton, which I only want to call Del Boca Vista since I've been here. Not anywhere near Palm Beach, Atlantic, Southeastern, Sunshine, Sailfish State University, where the Patriots have been. Andrew Callahan, Zack Cox, Dakota Randall, both of NESN. We are here to get ready for some real football with the help of our friends at High Noon, who don't know that are friends, but let's just be honest. It's Thursday. We're in South Florida. We're going to enjoy ourselves. So I mentioned the Patriots are obviously practicing down here. They flew down on Tuesday. We've seen 2 practices. The fields are soccer fields and lacrosse fields normally, but now they belong to the Patriots with their makeshift field goals. Overall, good move, bad move, or aside from that, what's your major takeaway about them being down here?
I mean, I guess if they win, it's a good move. They have to do something different to kind of reverse the Miami curse, so to speak. I think it was Bart Scott this week on one of those hot take shows said it's a desperation move. Maybe that's a little bit strong, but
you can always count on Bart Scott for some Patriots positivity.
Yeah, I mean, I think desperation is a bit strong, but it's very clear that they are placing a lot of emphasis and prominence on this game. So I don't think they would be doing this if they were 7-2 in Miami over the last couple of years.
Right.
It seems like Bill Belichick has recognized that the humidity is an issue, the climate is an issue. They just want to give the team an extra couple of days to get used to that. But the fact that it is where it is, if this was at Florida Atlantic, I don't think I would really question it at all. I was like, all right, well, Patriots want to go practice down in Florida for a couple of days. The fact that Palm Beach Atlantic, that doesn't have a football team, that the Patriots are practicing on soccer fields / lacrosse fields. The grass doesn't look great. It just
enrollment of like 3,000 and change. Like to me, the fact that they're there speaks to the seriousness with which they wanted to be there. Like it would be easy to say, oh, we can post up at FAU or FIU. Obviously not an option. All of these teams are playing. Like the fact that you kept searching and landed on this says no matter what, we were going to find a way to practice down here.
Yeah, and I don't think the question is, is there a value in coming down here and acclimating to the heat? I think that's obvious. I think just being here, it's insanely hot. It's insanely humid, especially when you're away from the coast and inland. Like it's really hot. Like I think that all that stuff is legit. The question is, why now are they suddenly caring this much about acclimating to the heat? And they started the season in 2014 in Miami. I don't think they did this trip. And so I think it's because I think Zach alluded to it. They're 2-7 the last 9 trips to Hard Rock Stadium. And I think it's more about, more than especially during the Tom Brady years, they can't afford to get off to a slow start this season.
Yeah, and talking to the guys today, they didn't really seem to care. Like you can tell they're probably not thrilled about standing next to a makeshift field goal post that's held together by rope and bags of sand that are literally tying it down to the ground. But David Andrews like, look, I played in worse. It's all football. There's no family. There's no distractions. And to think of what the win would mean in Miami, you're not only 1-0, you're 1-0 in the division. Right. You've won a road game in a place that obviously you haven't. And you've also beaten a team you're going to be fighting for a wild card spot, which I think is all of this is to say the Patriots will downplay. It's one game. It's one opener, arguably one of the least important on our schedule. But they're pushing a lot of eggs into this basket, and I think it's worth it.
It kind of I agree with you there. And it kind of goes – it's been funny to hear Bill Belichick kind of downplay the whole first month of the season, saying it's kind of an extension of the preseason. And that's true to the extent that I don't think you're going to see the kind of full Patriots team until a month or so into the year, just because that's what the NFL is. It takes teams a little while to kind of come together and gel and find their identities and whatnot. But with the Patriots don't have Tom Brady anymore. The margin for error is so slim. Their schedule is so difficult in the back half that I don't think the Patriots can kind of downplay the importance of these first 4 games. And I'm sure Bill Belichick is not doing that internally to his team, because the Patriots go 1-3 or 0-4 in these first 4 games. It's really difficult to imagine them climbing out of that hole. And then this game, even though it is week 1, you can easily imagine a situation where the Patriots and the Dolphins are both 8-win teams or 9-win teams potentially going into week 17. And this is going to keep one of those teams out of the playoffs and get one of those teams into the playoffs. So
right.
There's just a lot of variables, and it is an extremely important game for the Patriots.
Yeah, me and Zach talked about this. Maybe the Patriots are going to be a lot better this season than we and a lot of other people think they are. But we've talked about it. I don't know if you can go through this schedule and look at any game and say, yeah, that's a scheduled win for the Patriots. Maybe the Bears game.
I was going to say, maybe one Monday night in October.
Maybe the Bears game. But like last year, there was that really soft middle portion of the schedule. This year, I think it's really that 4-week stretch where I think it's the Browns, the Bears, the Jets, and the Lions.
Yeah.
But even the Lions, like I could talk myself into the Lions pulling off an upset. I wouldn't bet on it, but I could see it happening. So I just think it's really, they can't bank on any win this season. So I think it's as important as it's ever been for them to win all these games. And so they're pushing, like you said, all their chips in on this game against the Dolphins.
Yeah, and let's remember, this is a place where even Tom Brady struggled. Like their only win here in their last 5 drives is Brady 43-0. The Dolphins are actively leaking talent. They're tanking under Brian Flores, but then those same Dolphins come up and beat them in Foxborough. 2-7 in their last 9. I think sticking here on Sunday, there's a lot of newness here. Mike McDaniel, obviously Tyreek Hill here, all the guys we've been asking the guys at practice. But when you look at the Patriots offense, there's also a lot of new variables. And we've talked about this to death, like on your podcast, on NESN Television, on this podcast. Yeah. When they finally roll it out, and I've written about this, I think the way Miami plays defense is going to force them to tip their hand more than you would think anyway in an opener when you're finally playing for keeps. It's a man coverage, it's blitzes. I'm curious about their answers for that, considering they saw more man coverage and more blitzing than anyone else in the league last year. When you look at how they're playing offense, what intrigues you?
Just how the offensive line is going to look in this game. I think it's been the single number one issue of this entire summer for the Patriots, just in terms of changing personnel, changing coaching, and changing that scheme and the kind of unique communication nuances that are involved there. It just hasn't looked good so far. We haven't watched this team in a full practice or a full game in about 2 weeks now. So they have had some time to, for their sake, hopefully clean some things up and kind of dial in on some of those things that just really weren't clicking during the regular season. But it doesn't matter how talented Mac Jones is. It doesn't matter how good those running backs are. It doesn't matter how deep this pass catching group is. Yeah. If the Patriots offensive line plays the way it did during the preseason, this offense is going nowhere. They haven't been able to block in the run game, and especially with those outside zone runs that they've been putting in, and they haven't been able to protect Mac Jones. And it's boring, but it's important.
Well,
the Patriots need.
I'm glad you brought it up front, because it is boring. It's unsexy. It doesn't make for good fodder. This will not be the preview or the teaser I send out on Twitter when we publish this episode, but it is important because even just from the standpoint of the offensive line comprises, 5 out of 11 guys on that roster. Okay, 45% of your offense is all those dudes up front. If you are in any business or in any sort of team where 45% of the people are not carrying their weight, you're going to fail. Okay, 55%, even if you ace the rest, is a failing grade. Now, it is unsexy, so we can't really jump off of that. But is there any other position group or kind of matchup that you're looking for, or RPOs, or anything new with this offense?
I think the most intrigue for me is I just want to see, you guys talked about it, like, do they go out and run all the stuff that we saw during the offseason that didn't work out well? All the Shanahan-like stuff that we talked about, all the stretch runs, all those zone reads, all those things. Did they fix all those issues over the last 2 weeks? And if so, like, are they confident enough in with how clearly important they're taking this game, how bad they want to win it? Are they confident going out there and running those kinds of plays in this game? Or do they dial it back, play things safe, do more bread and butter Patriots offensive plays, power runs, the passing plays that we're used to seeing? I expect them to do a lot of hurry up and up tempo, given the success that they have with that during the practices that we saw. But I think it's imperative for them to get off to a fast start in this game. And so an easy way for that not to happen is to do some of the stuff that lets a Mac Jones just getting killed in the pocket during the offseason. So I just want to know, again, do they do this new offensive stuff that we've seen, or do they dial it back and play it safe to try and give themselves the best position to get a win?
Yeah, and it's funny because some of their confidence going into this game, obviously, is what they've done the last 2 weeks, because you mentioned we haven't seen them in a full practice or full game. The last time they did in Las Vegas, it was ugly. Very ugly bad. Enough. I think they kept the starting offense out there longer than they originally intended, because it was, we just can't end on this note with Mac getting sacked, all these runs going backwards. So they kept playing, got close to the end zone, but obviously kicked the field goal and lose that game against the Raiders. Now, the other part of their confidence is going to be, we're holding back a lot. And I've been told that they were holding back a lot in those joint practices, a time when, the public's there and other teams there, but you really want to get better at this new stuff you're installing. They saved some of that for the last 2 weeks. Now, a lot of that, of course, is going to fall on Mac Jones's plate. And you can make an argument, like I think you kind of were, put more of this on his plate, because the running game's going nowhere. You're best when you're in spread and shotgun. The risk of that, though, obviously, is you leave yourself a little bit more vulnerable to the blitz. How much of this game do you want to see in Mac Jones's hands, understanding there's an obvious benefit, but a real drawback for a guy who just can't afford to get hurt looking ahead for the rest of the season?
Well, as you mentioned it, this offense looked the best, in my opinion, this summer when it was operating in those spread 2-minute hurry up type things, where it was different than the kind of plodding Patriots kind of offense that we saw last year. It's when they did spread it out a little bit more, give Mac Jones a little bit more kind of leeway to sort of do his thing in the passing game. Obviously, you can't do that every play, and I don't think the Patriots will.
No.
But that was their most effective setup throughout the offseason. So I do think you should see more of that. I think you should see more of the kind of attacking downfield throws, especially we saw back in the spring, Mac Jones was excellent on deep passing.
Minicamp, yeah.
Yeah, in minicamp, obviously minicamps, no pads, and we didn't see quite as much of that in training camp. But he's shown the ability to do it. He showed the ability to do it in college. I'm interested to see how much of the Alabama type things that the Patriots may bring back in this game, because as you were mentioning, I think we're going to see things from the Patriots in this first game that we just haven't seen at all, that are brand new. We say, wow, we didn't see that in training camp.
Yeah.
What are they doing? Because
Triple option. Hello.
Like every team, it doesn't benefit you to put those plays out when either fans or reporters or a television audience can be watching it. Every single team is going to be saving things for the regular season. And especially since the Patriots are going through such a drastic, it seems, shift offensively, I think there's going to be stuff that are still in that bag that we don't even know about yet. And we're going to find out on Sunday.
The other side of that, though, is, because I'm in that camp too, if you spread it out against a high blitz team, the Dolphins were second in blitz rate last year, was almost 40%. It helps Mac see the field, identify blitzers, make checks and calls. That's his superpower, like play to that superpower. If you stop running the ball or take the emphasis away from running the ball, which obviously that was their goal last year, is to run. You're taking the ball out of the hands of two of your better players on offense. Like, I don't know if many people would make an argument that Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson aren't better than a Jacoby Myers and Devontae Parker are at their jobs. And when you look at Parker, for facing a team that's going to play a ton of man coverage, the guy who ranks second to last in separation in the NFL over the last 2 years is not the guy you really want winning in those situations, especially if you're seeing Davian Howard. So there might be something to having a good balance early on, but when push comes to shove, I think they'll probably lean into the shotgun, 3 receivers out wide, and try to pick their matchup there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one thing that's interesting is we were talking to Ramondre Stevenson yesterday, and he was asked how much confidence he has in the running game. And like, if you read it at face value, it almost sounds like a boilerplate answer, like, yeah, I feel confident in it. But he had this look to him like that he wanted to say more, but that he didn't. And so maybe they did figure stuff out over the last 2 weeks, and maybe the running game is going to be much better in this game than we saw during the offseason. But personally, like, to go back to the original question, I think like Mac Jones has to throw a lot in this game. He has to play very well for them to win. You talked about it. Even those joint practices against the Raiders, the second day they had the good drive that ended the practice. And the second day they had a few good drives, especially at the end, but there weren't a lot of running plays in those. It was mostly pass heavy. And so I think it's got to be a lot of what you're saying. I think he's got to air it out and do it off.
And one more quick point on the running game. I've seen people talking about how Bill Belichick will shift and he'll adapt. That's the word I'm looking for. He'll adapt if things aren't working. If the outside zone running just is not getting off the ground, as we saw in the preseason, if that continues, he'll just say, all right, fine, we tried, it's not going to work, we're going to go back to what we did before. The Patriots can't go back to what they did before because they don't have the personnel that they used to have. You can run normal, straight ahead, power runs, gap runs, stuff like that. You don't need a fullback to do that. But the Patriots can't just say, all right, well, this new stuff's not working, let's just go back to the running game we had last year, just because it's not possible anymore unless they want to use Jonnu Smith or Hunter Henry as a lead blocking fullback on every play. It's going to have to look different than it was last year, even if it doesn't look the same as we saw this summer. Yeah,
and I think part of that is on us to begin with, which, look, we can only do so much with 2 OTA practices, 2 minicamp practices. We convey, is this a new offense? Is it a Shanahan-style offense? Is it really the old, just with an emphasis? Is it streamlined? Like, this has been an evolving method of our, or description of the offense as we get more information. So I understand why there's a lot of confusion in that idea of, oh, let's just go back to the old stuff because all of it's new. When really it isn't new. Like, we know outside zone has been in this playbook for a while. And the other part about why you just can't go back to the old stuff, because it's already here, is the reason that they wanted to pivot to the outside zone is because of how it marries with the new play action bootleg game. And so if you remove that, you're really removing all of those play action throws, which you've seen, the Broncos in the 90s and 2000s, most recently the Rams, the Niners, the Packers, the Titans, everybody running to this style of offense because it's timeless, it works. But if you don't have that foundation of the running game, it's not that you can't run play action with an ineffective running game. It's just that if I don't need to believe there's going to be a handoff, I'll just come hunting for your quarterback. And then those play action passes become sacks. and those runs still go for short gains because you can't block them.
And on those rollout bootleg types, that's going to get your quarterback killed. If they know that that's going to be a bootleg the other side, when they say, all right, there's no way he's handing it to Ramondre Stevenson on this stretch run that's going to get blown up for a -2 yards.
Yeah.
The cornerback blitzing off the back end, that's going to be right in Matt Jones' face, and that's not what you want at all.
Yeah, and another point about the Patriots doing stuff that maybe they haven't always done, especially in the last few years, I think they have to have a downfield element to the passing game this weekend. Like if the running game gets stuffed, as I think a lot of people are concerned it might be, they just can't do short passes to Jacoby Myers and shallow crossers to Jonnu Smith or Hunter Henry all day long. It's going to go nowhere. The Dolphins are going to shrink the field, and the Patriots are going to get stuffed. I think they have to get some downfield element in this. I don't know if that's Devontae Parker, maybe Nelson Aguilar. He looked better this training camp. Maybe they get that going, but I think that has to show up this season because it just hasn't, especially last season, and really the last couple of years.
Yeah, well, this brings me to an interesting point too, because as we wrap up when the Patriots have the ball here, and then we'll go to when Miami's on offense facing the Patriots defense. Like, give me one area you feel most confident in from the Patriots standpoint, a certain matchup, and we're going to close, as a spoiler alert here, with a 3-2-1 close. 3 matchups, 2 keys, and then 1 extra point. Final thought. So without going, totally maybe matchup specific, but an area or part of the offense you feel best about, and then worst about when you think about how Miami wants to play. The players are going to have Byron Jones isn't there at corner, but Xavier Howard still is a good front 4. Like, this is a defense that brought back more starters and experience than anyone in the league.
Yeah, it sounds counterintuitive because I said earlier that the offensive line hasn't played well, and we've just talked about the run game struggles. But when the Patriots did use their kind of traditional straight ahead running during the preseason, they were pretty effective.
Yeah.
Ramondre Stevenson, very good running back. Damian Harris, very good running back. Obviously the quote unquote new stuff, the Shanahan influence, all those things weren't really there during the preseason. But you even saw in the Raiders game when they just said, all right, we're going to hand this guy the ball right up the middle. Ramondre Stevenson's going to get 6-7 yards on that.
You give the ball to your best players, good things happen. Like, sometimes it's that simple.
Yeah, and I think the fact that the running game has had so many issues this summer kind of has overshadowed the fact that the running game was the strength of the Patriots offense last year, and both of their top running backs are back. And theoretically, Ramondre Stevenson should be better now that he's not a rookie and he's in his 2nd season. Had a really good offseason by all indications, is slimmer, going to be more of a role in the passing game. I think you still have a very big strength in that running back room, and at least the kind of more traditional elements of that did look pretty good this summer.
Yeah, and for me, one matchup or one player that I feel like I can bank on is Jacoby Myers at this point. Regardless of who's on him, I just think there was a lot of buzz about Devontae Parker early in camp, but I think as camp went on, Jacoby Myers really separated himself as the top receiver on the team. Whether he's the best or the most talented, I guess that's up for debate. We can talk about what it means that Jacoby Myers is the best wideout in your receiving room.
He's the most productive.
He's
like
the most productive.
That description, not up
Most
for debate.
consistent, most productive.
Like, I think regardless of how the Dolphins defend him, you can bank on Mac and him connecting on enough passes. And I feel good about that. One thing, I don't know if I'm worried about it, but I'm definitely concerned about it and really curious is how does Cole Strange do in this game?
Yeah.
I think going up in his first real NFL game against a good defensive line, a good front 7, I think the big concern on him is he undersized? Is he ready physically for the NFL? How does he do if he has to go up against, the Christian Wilkins of the world? Raekwon Davis is a big player. Some of the really good players from Miami up front. I want to see how Cole Strange does, and it wouldn't surprise me if I don't know if he plays terribly, but if he struggles a bit in this game, and I think that could be an issue for the team.
Big jump from the FCS too, straight into a week 1 starting job in the NFL. Like, yeah. I think maybe not enough people have taken that into consideration. He's not going to be playing Western Carolina in this game. This is going to be, it's a significant step up there for Cole Strange.
It's funny you say that because after they selected him in the draft, someone I knew when I was covering college who coached offensive line texted me that same thing. I was like, what do you think? You've seen him, like, he now works in draft prep. And he's like, this is a real big jump. And, you go back to the Senior Bowl, Cole Strange comes on, holds his own. But when you look at the list, and this is way back, it's really not relevant to Cole Strange in September preparing to play in his NFL season. But like, he was not billed as a star in any of those all-star games. Like, it was not a top 10 player riser from the Senior Bowl. I think that's been glossed over. As we all understand, there are going to be growing pains, but you're going to have growing pains from a personnel standpoint, from a good defensive line from the Dolphins, and also a scheme standpoint where they're throwing a lot at you. Like, that experience will reveal itself with the breadth of different schemes and pressures that they run, because everyone's already on the same page. You're just kind of dusting it off and then expanding upon that. I'm going to co-sign in Jacoby Myers. That's an area for the Patriots offense absolutely feel best about, particularly against the Dolphins' now diminished corner depth. And I'm going to go with a different offensive lineman that I would be worried about, and this is if he even plays, is Isaiah Wynn.
Yeah.
Okay, so he had 1 sack allowed and 1 quarterback hit allowed in his only preseason game. That was 4 drives against Las Vegas. And okay, he's been dinged up. But there's been at no point in this summer or the spring, when again, no pads, but that also tells you something that you look at him and go, I have a lot of confidence he can do this.
Yep.
And part of that is some shuffling parts, and you have new coaching. Obviously, there's been a drop down with Matt Patricia there, splitting his attention between the line and the offense as a whole. But he's going to see a lot of Emmanuel Ogbah, a guy who's had 9 sacks last year and the season before that. I think he needs some help. And even if he doesn't play, Justin Herron absolutely will need some help against Ogbah. So that's where I'd be worried. Flipping to the other side, I wrote this today, and it's going to be in the Boston Herald tomorrow, Friday, so maybe you can read this later. When the Patriots are on defense and defenders we've spoken to, they don't sound afraid or like almost like they would welcome playing Tua. Okay, Tua, a lightning rod across the league. Okay, prove it time for Tua. Is he good? Is he not? Is he average? I don't care about that. I care about how he's going to perform Sunday against the Patriots, who've not beaten him in 3 matchups. But in those matchups, he's averaging 152 yards per game, and their comments top out at like, he fits the system, or I don't need to do anything but respect him, according to Matt Judon.
He's an NFL player.
Yeah, he's an NFL player. Do you have any other read on him than that, or this week from what we've heard?
No, I mean, it really, I mean, it goes all the way back to early last year's season opener, when we were talking to JC Jackson.
Yep.
I think it was after the game.
Yep.
Where he said,
after a loss,
when he said, yeah, that's going to happen. You play Tua, you expect him to throw one to you. Basically, yeah. He's going to have at least one kind of panic, throw the ball up, and if you're a defense, you hope you intercept it. The Patriots did in that game. They weren't able to win the game, but yeah, it's been even the more diplomatic players than Matt Judon's comments on him were so hilarious. It was basically like, I don't admire Tua. I respect him because he plays in the NFL, and it's hard to play in the NFL. Somebody asked him what's the challenge of facing him. He said, "Oh, well, he's a lefty. There's not many lefty quarterbacks in the NFL." And
he just does the opposite of what everyone else does. Yeah, it's not that he excels at it.
That's basically been the gist of all of these comments. That, yeah, it's just interesting hearing the quote unquote compliments of like, yeah, he's a lefty. Yeah, they win a lot of games against us when he's in there. That's been kind of the line from the Devin McCourties and the Jalen Mills, the guys who we're talking to today, saying, yeah, well, we haven't beaten him in 3 tries, so we can't really talk too much smack about him, which is true.
Yeah.
And the Patriots did have some issues against Tua in those games, more so as a runner than as a passer. I mean, three of his 6 career rushing touchdowns came against the Patriots. A lot of those on kind of blown, contained goal line type plays. But this is not a guy that should scare the Patriots, I don't think. I mean, you could expect better results from Tua this year because he's got an improved offensive line. He's got that improved set of weapons with Tyreek Hill and Cedric Wilson and Jalen Waddle in his second year. So you would hope, if you're a Tuanon supporter, which I'm afraid one of them is like
going to pop out of the pool, drag you in there, and we are never going to see Zach again.
So I don't want to talk too much out of turn because I don't want to get jumped later on. But yeah, you would expect that he would be better this year, but he hasn't shown really anything at the NFL level, especially against the Patriots, that he's a quarterback that you really have to fear. And it certainly seems like the Patriots defense doesn't.
Yeah, and I think he's an average quarterback. I don't think he's why they've lost those last 3 games against him. And I'm also always dubious when there's such a concerted effort to gas up a guy like that. Like, we've heard Tyreek Hill since he got there.
From Miami. Yeah,
from Miami. Like where Tyreek Hill is like, oh, he's better than Patrick Mahomes in some areas. I'm like, okay. You see some of the reporters in Miami doing that. The coaches like talking up the deep ball, the velocity on
Mike McDaniel said he throws the most catchable ball he's ever coached.
Yeah. And when I started hearing that stuff, I'm like, okay, what do you really think behind the scenes?
You know? Yeah. I think too, because we're all on the same page. It seems the Patriots are. And we say this also as people who are constantly imbued with the Patriots throwing bouquets every single week. And you notice I did last year, like Belichick saying makes all the throws. It's kind of an indication that you suck. That is a compliment that you can make all of the throws, but that's the indicator here. He did not say that this week, which I don't know if he's pivoting, but like the praise anyway tops out. You turn this around though. People still expect the Dolphins to win. They are a favorite. People are continuing to put money in the Dolphins. I think that's a fair bet. I think this is a more talented roster in Miami. The conversation around Tua is the inverse of what we had about Mac. The conversation around Mac is how can he elevate the rest of the team around him and how high can that go? The question for Tua is, does it matter that he's probably below average to average because the talent around him will elevate him? Is that so much of a disparity for Tua offensively and all the weapons around him that you go Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Cedric Wilson, that he shouldn't be the conversation. Like, how would you solve all of those weapons around him? Is there a good answer for that?
I mean, I guess you have to sort of see what it's like on the field, as kind of cop-outy as that is. You just don't know what it's going to look like yet. And this was probably one of the more interesting things I heard this week was from Devin McCourty, when he was talking about how you go into this matchup against Tyreek Hill, who obviously the Patriots have faced like 5 or 6 times in his career, torched them his first 2 matchups. They really held him in check the last couple, but he's saying, all right, you're going up against Tyreek Hill, who you know, but he's on a new team in a new scheme with a new head coach, a new quarterback, and that head coach has never been an NFL head coach. So you don't know what his actual scheme even looks like. What's Mike McDaniel's scheme? Is it the same as Kyle Shanahan's scheme, who he worked under, or is it different? So it's really difficult to even kind of prioritize this Dolphins offense right now, because if they come out and they score 40 points this week, nobody's going to say, man, Tua remains a real problem for this team. Maybe this does work. Maybe these guys come in and Tua does noticeably improve, even if it's because there are better people around him. I don't think anybody in Miami is really going to complain about that. So it's a little tough just because you don't have any really basis to go off of right now.
Yeah, and I don't think the situations are totally analogous between the 49ers and the Dolphins. And as Zach said,
great word.
Yeah. and as Zach said, we don't know what Mike McDaniel's going to do, but I mean, there are some similarities in the rosters. You know, the 49ers had, super athletic receiver in Deebo Samuel, versatile running backs, a great tight end in George Kittle, other talent across the roster and on defense. You could say a lot of those same things about the Dolphins. But I've also always thought the 49ers off roster was at least somewhat overrated. I thought a lot of that is what Shanahan and McDaniel were able to do. And they made it work with Jimmy Garoppolo. And we can debate about how good Jimmy Garoppolo is. I guess, I would say maybe he's a little bit better than Tua, but I think they're comparable.
Certainly more proven.
Yeah. But I think still, I don't see a huge gap between them. And if the 49ers can go as far as they have with Jimmy Garoppolo, and if Mike McDaniel with a somewhat similar roster and a lot of talent and a similar scheme with Tua at quarterback, like I think, again, if they go out there and win, the conversation is not going to be about him. Just like, well, I guess it was a conversation about Jimmy in San Francisco. But again, if they make it work, it's not really going to matter.
Yeah. All right. Really quickly, I think Teron Armstead, obviously an all-pro left tackle. You're just going to have to deal with him. Cedric Wilson from the Cowboys, fine, good number 3 receiver. Jalen Waddle looks like he's going to play. Last year, based on his yards per catch average, he's like a souped-up Jarvis Landry with better long speed. And, he'll be better this year. But if you're going to lose this game like that, if you're the Patriots, and there's one thing you have to do to keep yourself from losing, it's contain Tyreek Hill.
Yep.
This is why we keep asking about him. Your game plan for him, even understanding we don't know what the offense is like and understanding all those other players, what they have to deal with, would be what?
Trust Jonathan Jones, I think. He's done a good job against Hill in these last couple of matchups. I know that everybody thinks back to the AFC Championship game where the Patriots just essentially bracketed Hill with Jones and Devin McCourty over the top. They didn't really do that as much in the last couple of games. And the last 2 matchups, they allowed Jones to have some more one-on-one matchups with Hill. And I think that's probably going to be the best bet in this game, just because you do have some other receiving threats on this Dolphins team, even though the caveats you mentioned that you're probably not going to see a 75-yard touchdown from Jalen Waddle, and Cedric Wilson he's a good number 3. He's not a guy that's going to break a game either. But this isn't a case where it's Tyreek Hill and then a gigantic drop off and then kind of some middling second and third options. I think the Patriots, especially with the setup they have now, where there's no kind of elite Pro Bowl caliber lockdown number 1 cornerback, it's going to be, I think they're going to play some teams a little bit differently. They're going to have to play some teams a little bit differently because they don't really have the ability, unless they really trust Jalen Mills now, to just go like, all right, you cover that guy. That's the number 1. Take him. We'll figure everything else out. So it'll probably be.
So you're saying Shadow Hill with Jonathan Jones?
Just from a speed perspective, it's probably going to be more of a group effort than maybe we've seen in the past, just because I don't think you're going to see as many sort of you're assigned to this guy, you're assigned to this guy, you're assigned to this guy this year as we have in the past. But you need a fast guy to keep up with Tyreek Hill, and I think Jonathan Jones is the best option.
Yeah, I like that. And I'm going to add, because I will end with your game plan for him and move on to the next point. Stick Jalen Mills and Jalen Waddle. Yeah. And that's ultimately like, look, he might be quicker than Jalen Mills, but if Jalen Mills is going to be your number 1 corner, this is the old put the number 1 corner and the number 2 receiver, bracket and double. the number one, which I think to some degree has been overstated about a Belichick ploy or, his favorite thing. Like when you had your last number one corner, Stephon Gilmore, he took and eliminated the number one option most of 2018 and 19. But in this case, right, given the body type and the skill set of a Jonathan Jones, like he fits with Tyreek Hill better than anyone in the league as much as you can. And you'll find help, based on your leverage, based on whether you're single or too high. The problem for me is, okay, you match up those two, you start dealing with Cedric Wilson. If you want to stay in too high to protect against the deep ball, you open up the short middle of the field, which is where Tua is going to thrive in all the RPOs. So, like, how do you factor that balance of protecting deep and helping on Hill versus the other areas that really fit what Tua is best at?
Well, and I think to that point, this is going to be a big game where we see, how much faster the Patriots really got at linebacker. I think that's going to be a huge X factor in this game. But to bring up another matchup kind of related to this, like let's just say the Patriots figure it out on Hill because they have recently, regardless of what Mike McDaniel pulls out of his hat. And let's say Jalen Mills does a good job on Jalen Waddle. I think I could see this game being won and lost with someone like Mike Gesicki on third downs. And so I wonder, how does Kyle Duggar do in those situations if he is put on him? He had some struggles early in camp on tight ends. It looked like he got a little bit better. He had that rough play against Las Vegas Raiders. So I think, making sure they stop someone like Mike Gesicki on third downs or just in some of those key situational moments could be big if they lock down everything with the receivers that we're talking about.
It's going to be kind of fascinating too, just to see how the Patriots deploy all these defensive backs because they're really 9 or 10 deep at DB right now. If you include the safeties and the cornerbacks, and I don't see even the guys that are lower down on that cornerback depth chart, which right now the reserves project to be Jack Jones, Marcus Jones, and Sean Wade.
Yeah. I
think those guys are playable at this point. I don't think you want either of them in a starting role right now, but there's nobody on this roster, even like Joanne Williams in the last couple of years. You're saying, man, if Williams is playing in this game, that's rough. They're really going to pick on him. Obviously, there's a drop off between the starters and the backups, but I think there's a lot of talent between that cornerback group and then the safety group, which has the 4 veterans. Yeah. Josh Bledsoe looked pretty good this summer. I think the Patriots have the ability to do some creative and unexpected things in the secondary in this season. I'm excited to see what they come up with.
And ultimately, too, we talk about shadowing Jonathan Jones or shadowing Tyreek Hill with Jonathan Jones. Hey, Jalen Mills, wherever Jalen Waddle goes, just be in his back pocket. Ultimately, when you look at the secondary as a whole, the talent's obviously at safety. You mentioned the 4 guys. Let's just rattle them up. Devin McCourty, Adrian Phillips, Kyle Duggar, and now Jabril Peppers. Ideally, you would play more 3 safety than 3 corner nickel. Yeah. And if you go dime, maybe it's 3 and 3 or 4 safeties if you can fit it in. The problem doing that then is you're probably playing more zone, which you don't want to give up a whole lot considering the RPO package and that, it's easier to get those catch and run plays. So how do they strike that balance? And also, if you go to all this time defense, we haven't even brought up the running game, which, okay, Chase Edmonds, Raheem Mostert, not top 10, top 15, maybe not even top 20 running back in the league. But what they are very fast. And so if you give up an outside zone play, which you were going to see from Miami, and he finds a crease and gets off to the races, like screw all the matchups and all the secondary reshuffling and all of the coverage and brackets and whatever, like you're down 7-0 and they haven't thrown a pass yet.
And previous games against the Dolphins, obviously different scheme, different personnel. So who knows how much you can actually take from it. But the Patriots have really struggled against the run against the Dolphins in the last 2 years. I think it's their games in Miami each of the last 2 seasons, both late season games. They just couldn't stop the run at all. It was whether that was Tua on some keepers or Myles Gaskin or Salvon Ahmed. I think Salvon Ahmed had like 100 yards in last year's game. It's just been a real problem for them the last 2 years. And on paper, the Dolphins should have a better running game this year with the improvements they made to their offensive line. Some of their guys like Chase Edmonds, who they brought in the backfield. So that I think could continue to be an issue for the Patriots. And it's one I agree, haven't really talked about because there's been so much emphasis on Tyreek Hill and Tua in that passing game.
And I would add too, I think not all the issues, but a lot of the issues with it, like we could see with the secondary and with Miami's passing game. Now, a lot of those can be alleviated if the Patriots have a strong pass rush. I think that's one of the more encouraging things that we saw during training camp preseason. I thought the front 7 looked really good. I'm really interested personally to see how Christian Barmore does in this game. I want to see if he's kind of taking on more of a 3-down role. Does he kind of leapfrog Lawrence Guy either early on or at some point in the season? How does Matthew Judon do? He looked great during training camp. Who's playing opposite him? It's an Anthony Jennings. But if the Patriots get a lot of pressure on Tua, I think that could, help them a lot with covering Miami's
depth of the pass rush this year is going to be a real need for the Patriots because last year you had Matthew Judon, who was great for 3/4 of the year. You had Christian Barmore, had a lot of really strong moments as a pass rusher. Then there was a pretty big gap before you got down to anybody else in that pass rush. They need 4, 5, 6 guys who can contribute there, not just the top 2.
Yeah, and this goes to the old creepy defensive coordinator saying, if you cut off the head of the snake, that's it. Like, you pressure the quarterback, and we can list off in the same way I talked about the running game where, okay, you take care of everything in the back end. We don't have to take care of things in the back end from a defensive standpoint if your pressure gets home, and that's what they're really counting on. Armstead's going to be an issue, but Austin Jackson, vulnerable at right tackle. Some of their guards could be taken advantage of, but we also said this before, at least I did, each of the matchups last year, both Miami wins. But I think this is a good way to end because at least defensively, there is hope, starting with obviously Belichick, but also some of the guys they brought in. You mentioned the speed at linebacker. Mac Wilson is going to factor in. Christian Barmore, year 2 leap. Kyle Duggar, I think for me, if we had to nail down one area or position, you're excited to see tomorrow. It could be matchup specific or just be like, I'm excited to see this guy, period, this season. Kyle Duggar is going to factor into some of their deeper coverages. He's probably going to see someone like Gesicki. He's definitely going to try to kill someone over the middle of the field, and he's probably going to succeed. So for all of those reasons, I'm excited to see Kyle Duggar in year 3, as with a lot of these 2020 picks, including Anthony Jennings, who I think have had their development kind of stunted just because their whole career has been dominated by COVID.
Yeah, you throw Josh Uche into that mix too as well. And I think maybe hasn't really taken on the quite as large of a role as some people were expecting going into camp. I know there was a lot of projections that he might be that kind of starting outside linebacker opposite Matthew Judon, kind of elevate into more of an every down role. That hasn't happened so far. From what we saw during training camp in the preseason, looks like he's still kind of that pass rush specialist. Maybe that changes over the course of the season. Maybe he sort of starts to take some early down snaps from someone like Jennings and gets more in the mix there. But even if he is in that third down kind of passing down pass rush role, he's got to be more productive than he was last year. Last year, 3 sacks in the first 2 games, 0 sacks, 1 quarterback hit for the rest of the season. Did miss some time with an injury, some time with COVID, but he played in, I think, 12 games last year and was basically a non-factor in about 9 of them. So I'm really interested to see what they can get from him this season because he's someone who can provide that pass rushing depth that I was talking about.
Yeah, and I'm looking at Raekwon McMillan. I think it's
Former Dolphin.
Yeah, well, and I think he could have a big role in this game. And he's someone who we talked about the speed at linebacker. He definitely has that, and that could be a huge factor in this game for the Patriots. And obviously, he had the really good training camp last year before going down with the injury. And I thought that there was a lot of buzz about him going into the offseason, coming off that injury. And I thought it looked like he was a little slow getting going. But as camp progressed, and especially in the preseason games, I thought he really started to pop. You saw the open field speed. You saw his ability to tackle in open space, and I thought he really played well. And I just think if they can get a good performance out of him, and if his speed shows up, and if Mac Wilson's speed shows up, I do not think this is an ideal game for Jelani to buy. I think that would be a concern if he's out there. I want to see how Juwan Bentley does in this game because I still think Juwan Bentley straight ahead going at the quarterback and going out the line. I think he does a really good job. I think he's good in run defense. I still think it's spotty when he gets stuck in coverage and the Dolphins could key on a matchup like that. Yeah, those linebackers specifically, I think are what I'm really watching.
Bentley's a really good shout because you go back to, and I asked Evan McCourty about this today, their game against San Francisco in 2020, where the Niners absolutely tear them apart in the first half. Thank God that stadium was empty because everyone would have left by halftime anyway. And it was Mike McDaniel on that staff, Kyle Shanahan, picking on Bentley, putting Jonathan Jones in impossible run fits, Deebo Samuel starting out wide, coming into the backfield, and then zipping back for 15 yards. Like, that plays a role, and I think how do the Patriots protect Bentley? One quick aside on Raekwon McMillan, because I think you're right. He did show improved speed, but it's also a way to highlight how speed at the linebacker level in New England has been so bad.
Right.
Because relative to the rest of the league, Raekwon McMillan in the speed department is average.
Right.
But what gets him a half step ahead are those instincts, which is going to be number one with a bullet every time, in addition to being at least 235, 240 pounds. What gets you to play linebacker in New England? You must be instinctive. That is non-negotiable. But that keeps them a stepping up ahead because they want to have size there, and that's why they're still playing with a Bentley and a McMillan in there, who I think will be an interesting player. But for me, I think moving down to 3-2-1, we got 3 keys, 2 matchups, and then 1 extra point. I'll start with 1 key. You go next, and Zach, finish this off.
Perfect.
My key here is going to be defensively, and it's going to include those linebackers both in the middle and off the edge. But I think you have to drop 8 a lot on Sunday, and it's not because you need to protect totally against Tyreek Hill. It's not entirely because you need to cover in the middle of the field. It's not because, as J.C. Jackson said yesterday, last year, When Tua doesn't have his first read, he'll throw it up. It's because of all of those things. And I think ultimately, like you've seen them handle Tyreek Hill in the past, most recently Kansas City in 2020, they dropped 8 a lot. And our outside linebackers go in short zone. It's man across the board and then 1 or 2 high. That's a formula, I think, that takes care of your coverage matchups. It stops those quick RPO slant throw windows for Tua. And eventually Judon and Barmore and maybe Anuche, if they get to third down, gets home. Like that, I think forcing Tua to be patient is your winning method. You just have to be patient defensively as opposed to trying to hit the easy button with an all-out blitz that then lets Tyreek Hill loose for 60 yards downfield.
Agreed.
Yeah, for me, it's not really an X's and O's take. I just think they got to get off to a fast start. I think that's the most important thing for them. I mean, it really doomed them towards the end of last season. All those games at the end when they really started sliding, it was slow starts. The Indy game obviously comes to mind, and then against Buffalo, I think that it just started to snowball in all those games. And I think if it happens in this game, if they get off to a slow start, they get down, a couple of scores early, especially with all the pressure I think that's on this team, whether they want to admit it or not. All the talk about the offense, all the things we could talk about all offseason, I could see it snowballing rather and getting ugly pretty quick. So I think, if they get off to a good start and they feel good about themselves going into halftime, I think that'll go a long way towards them pulling out this game.
For mine, I go back to the first point I mentioned in this podcast. It's the offensive line. They've got to be better than they were in the preseason. They've got the communication just needs to improve. You can't have the free rushers. You can't have those run plays that keep getting blown up behind the line of scrimmage. For this offense, for any offense, if you're immediately in 2nd and 13 because you had a 3-yard loss on first down, just puts you in a difficult spot. And I'm really interested to see how the Patriots handle the in-game adjustments from the offensive line, because as we've talked about ad nauseum, it's week 1. Nobody really knows what either of these teams is going to come out with. The Patriots are going to see some things pass rush related or defensive scheme related that they weren't expecting. And if Matt Patricia is calling the offensive plays, what's that process going to be like on the sideline when they come back, when David Andrews and the rest of these offensive linemen come down, sit on the bench? Who's going to be the coach to sit them down and say, all right, we saw that Ogba was doing this and Christian Wilkins is doing this. Like we need to kind of adjust our checks in this situation or whatever it may be. Is that going to be Matt Patricia, or is Matt Patricia going to be over talking with Joe Judge and Bill Belichick and Mac Jones about a play calling issue from the previous drive? And if that's the case, then is it Billy Yates, who we saw be up in the booth for the first half of some of the preseason games? Are they going to say, David Andrews, you just kind of coach the guys up? You're a captain. You've been around for a while. That's going to be such an important aspect of this game, is adjusting to things that they weren't expecting from Miami. And so far, we don't know what that process is going to look like. So it's hard to have confidence that the Patriots will be able to do it.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it, Zach, because I was going to say you don't complete your Patriots podcast bingo card unless you bring up the offensive play call.
Yeah.
Somehow
if people are drinking at home, that would have been waiting for their first sip, and there it just came.
Somehow we made it almost the entire way without it. But I would just add on to that, like as just an overly simple X factor, just Matt Patricia doing a good job of calling the plays. I mean, we've talked about it so much. Like, is he up for the task? Is he qualified? Like, I think that's just obviously a huge thing going into this game. And does he just do a good job? Like, as simple as that sounds.
And I'm still in the camp that I think Bill might start and call plays anyway. It's a possibility. He might take it over later. It might all be on Patricia, but this just seems way too much, way too soon for me. And Bill understands it, and I don't think we need a whole lot of practice. But TBD, we're not going to spend too much time in that. 2 matchups. I have already determined these because this podcast is a dictatorship and not a democracy. First one we hit on earlier, and I'm glad we hit the brakes because we're going to do him now. Jacoby Myers, and he's going to be in the slot primarily against either Nick Needham. I don't think we'll see old friend Keon Cross in there, former special teamer.
Talking some smack this week.
Yes, he was. Yeah. That's not going to help them. Practicing the weather. Thank you, Keon Crossan. Instagram account. It'll be him versus Noah. See, I made fun of his name in the email, and now this is screwing me up on
Igbenogany. Igbenogany. Yes.
Not Igbenogany, which is how I very kindly wrote this in the email. Jacoby Myers versus either Needham or Noah.
Igbenogany.
Thank you. Will be the biggest disparity they have in any of those receiver matchups. So when it comes down to 3rd and 6, when it comes down to the red zone, and Miami is playing man coverage because that's what Miami does, that's the option to think that Mac is going to take, because Jacoby Myers led everyone by a country mile in receptions last year. It spoke to trust, it spoke to separation, and you're not looking at Devontae Parker if he sees Xavier Howard. You're not looking to Kendrick Bourne, who we haven't seen in 3 weeks. And Nelson Aguilar, maybe this is a game for him, but ultimately I think that's the most reliable matchup and will be a really important battleground and probably more of a bellwether for the whole offense.
Yeah, I think you'll see Hunter Henry maybe into that mix on some as a third down security blanket type guy, but it's still Jacoby Myers. I think it's a different debate over whether it's a good thing that Jacoby Myers is your most productive and most reliable receiver. Probably not. The Patriots probably hoped that one of these receivers they brought in the last couple of years would be that guy by this point. But I mean, the point stands. Last year, Patriots brought in Nelson Aguilar, Kendrick Bourne, number one receiver in training camp, Jacoby Myers, number one receiver in the regular season, Jacoby Myers. This year, they go out, they make the trade for Devontae Parker, they draft Tyquan Thornton in the second round, they bring back Aguilar, bring back Bourne, number one receiver in camp, Jacoby Myers, and it wasn't even particularly close.
No.
I do think that Aguilar had a good camp, but it was clearly Myers who had that strongest connection with Jones, who was the most consistent, who was the most productive, especially in those third down type roles. And I don't see that changing this year. I mean, the Patriots are hoping somebody else elevates and maybe even supersedes him in that department. But from the role he plays and how productive he's been, I think he's going to continue to be an extremely important player for Mac Jones this year.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I would also add, and you brought him up, and maybe I'm just starting to talk myself into this, but I just have a feeling that Nelson Aguilar is going to have like a sneaky big year. Or it's just better than last year. I think he looked a lot better during training camp. I mean, again, maybe he's just saying it, but Mac Jones like speaks as glowingly about him as he does anybody else in the team. So it wouldn't surprise me if Nelson Aguilar has a good game. Remember, his best game of the year last year was Week 1 against Miami.
That was one of my earliest offseason takes, that Nelson Aguilar is going to bounce back for a stat that I've cited a million times, and then I took a break. And then I think I mentioned it in some hit last week and was like, oh, it's been long enough. I can redust off this stat that when Mac Jones was throwing 20 yards downfield, he was least accurate to Nelson Aguilar, his deep threat, which is his only big major skill. And so when Nelson Aguilar doesn't catch a couple passes that are just absolutely outside of his reach, that takes away a good 40 to 50 to 60 yards, double that, 80 to 100 to 120 yards. You add that to his total last year, it would have been a normal season.
Right.
You add one of those to this game,
right,
that is a touchdown that you supposedly get from nowhere, becomes unexpected and change the whole matchup.
The play that we saw against the Panthers, I think it was, when they connected for 52 yards, one of those would be huge.
Yeah, right down the sideline of preseason.
Yeah, and if they connect on one of those, obviously that would go a long way. And I think one other note, real quick, with Jacoby Myers, I think it is worth noting that he's been dealing with that knee injury. I don't know how severe it is, but he was forced out of that Raiders game. They were kind of quiet about it a little bit. He's had the sleeve on during practice. I don't expect him to not play this weekend, but you never know. Maybe he's more limited than we expect.
That was subconsciously really trying to talk yourself into Nelson Aguilar. It's like, I'm going to bump him up and then bring Jacoby down a little bit. He's a little early.
Yeah, Jacoby's on a snap count. Nelson Aguilar.
Okay. Well, we're going to stick with Jacoby. Defensively, Matt Judon is going to see a huge disparity in offensive tackle quality. If he's on the right side of the defense, he will see a lot of Teron Armstead, All-Pro. If he is on the left side of the defense, he will see a lot of Austin Jackson, first-round pick that the Dolphins are still trying to talk themselves into. And I think Jackson's developed a little bit. But bottom line, if the pass rush gets home, it will be because Matt Judon gets home. If they're setting the edge of the run game, it will be because Matt Judon is setting that edge, not necessarily a Josh Uche or Anthony Jennings. He has to win on Sunday.
Yep. And again, I think for the Patriots' long-term benefit, they want to make that not be the case at some point this season, that they can have success defensively if Judon has an off day or completely falls off a cliff like he did last season. But yeah, right now it's hard to imagine the Patriots defense having any sort of dominant performance if that doesn't include a big game from Matthew Judon. So I think from the disparity that you mentioned, it would behoove them to line up Matthew Judon opposite Austin Jackson pretty frequently in this game, because Teron Armstead is one of the better tackles in the NFL. It was interesting right after Matt Judon had his comments about Tua this week, where he's basically said, I respect him because he's an NFL opponent. He was asked about Teron Armstead, and he called him one of the best offensive tackles in the league and a really good player. So there are some opponents that Matthew Judon is willing to praise. Tua is not one of them, but Teron Armstead definitely is.
Yeah, I don't really have any doubts about whether or not Matthew Judon's going to show up and have a good game this weekend. I thought he looked great, especially towards the end of training camp.
He's had a good summer.
Yeah. And I think with all this time, the Patriots are going to find some sort of way to scheme up pressures for him to put him in a good position to succeed. So yeah, my question isn't about how he's going to do early in the season. It just remains, is it going to be the same fade that we saw last year? That's my biggest concern for him. who knows whether it's going to happen, but I don't know. Maybe I'm overly confident, but I think they're going to find a way to have him go off this weekend.
All right, one extra point. What have we not said?
I think Jonnu Smith bounced back here.
Ooh,
I think he's
does it start this weekend?
Yes, mildly. Our buddy Sammy P, NESN betting guy, messaged me the other day. I think it's plus 525 for Jonnu Smith to catch a touchdown this week. I said, smash that. I like that bet. I think the fact that he was at OTAs and was healthy for minicamp and was healthy for all of training camp, I think that's going to make a gigantic difference for him this season. That coupled with some scheme changes that you see, I think the Patriots, look, they knew that Jonnu Smith was going to be on the team this year. He was due something like $12 million. He had like a $15 million cap hit.
He's going to be on the team the next 2 years now with that restructure.
That restructure, which I think even speaks more to this, more of the confidence that they might have in him. They knew he was going to be part of this offense. I think they made some changes to kind of accentuate some of his strengths, which is getting the ball in his hands in space and letting him run. Because even last year, which was basically an abject disaster after week 2, he still led all NFL tight ends in yards after catch per reception, 3rd overall in the NFL. I think it was behind. I think it was Rondell Moore and Debo were the only players that ranked above him in that stat, according to Next Gen Stats. So
this is above expectation.
No, just in general, yards after catch per reception.
Oh, per reception. Okay.
Per reception. Yeah. So he was, obviously there weren't nearly as many receptions as the Patriots were hoping. He only caught, I believe, 27 or 29 balls last year, but he was effective when he did have the ball in his hands. I think the Patriots are going to find more ways to make that happen. And after what we saw from him in training camp, he was maybe their 2nd or 3rd best pass catcher behind Jacoby Myers, maybe Nelson Aguilar, maybe throw one other guy in there.
He was, 2nd leading in total catches in game.
Jonnu Smith bounce back. I'm calling it.
Yeah, and for me, we'll see how healthy he is if he's going to play in this game. But I think Ty Montgomery is someone that could be a huge factor for this team. Again, we can talk about, with the state of your offense, if you're thinking that Ty Montgomery could be a real pivotal player in it. But I think he was the busiest passing down back during training camp. And I think it's going to be big for Mac Jones to find cheap yards somewhere, especially in this game and throughout the season. And again, we don't know if Ty Montgomery is going to play. I'm surprised that he's back at practice early, given how that injury looks against the Las Vegas Raiders. But the Patriots used him during training camp in the preseason. Like, he was going to have a big role in this offense. There was a lot of talk about Ramondre Stevenson maybe taking on more of that 3rd down role, being more of a receiving back, and maybe that does come to fruition. But if training camp was in the indication, Ty Montgomery is going to have a big role in this team. And so I think he's just going to be a really important player, not just in this game, but throughout the season, if he's healthy.
All right, my extra point is going to go to special teams. And I initially wanted to go spicy. Like, we will see some sort of fake. Like, they're just going to go, we need this game. We came down on Tuesday. We're installing a new offense. We haven't showed any of it in the preseason. Like, just another egg in that basket. But I think
Dolphins love special teams fakes too.
Yes. The more probably salient point is just the fact that they're replacing a new gunner opposite Matthew Slater. And if Tyreek Hill is allowed to return punts, that becomes a real problem. Now, Jake Bailey could just as easily send it into row 6 of section G, and then we don't have to worry about this. But you can't have breakdowns again as a team that's an underdog on the road against a division opponent. So watch those sort of plays. The coverage from the kick teams and the punt teams is now all of the background noise goes down. I think this is Tuanon creeping in on us, and all the fountains have been cut off, and then we'll be cut off too. But I think it's a small thing that could come up in a big way, particularly as all of these teams are ironing out the details that you just can't see until you're live and the bullets are flying. As much as you had 3 preseason games, all of those are backup special teamers. All these guys are regulars now, and you're trying to replace a star regular in Justin Bethel.
Yeah. 3 guys I saw working in that role in practice the other day. Lil Jordan Humphrey, currently on the practice squad. They'd have to elevate him if they want to use him there. Jonathan Jones, who's done it before, was a gunner early in his career. But if he's a starting outside cornerback, maybe you don't want him sprinting 60 yards down the field, then having to cover Tyreek Hill in the next play. And an interesting one, Pierre Strong. I feel like we didn't see him doing much gunner work during the summer.
Didn't see much of anything.
Didn't see him do much of anything. He was doing some kick returns, some other special team stuff, but he was out there working with the Gunners the other day. Cam Acorn, special teams coordinator, said earlier this week that they've got a lot of fast guys that they're trying to work out in that role. Pierre Strong, if he's anything, he's fast, ran a 4.37 40. Maybe that's some way that they find a way to squeeze him onto the game day roster. So yeah, it's another underrated kind of unsexy thing, but it is going to play an important role in this game when you got a guy like Hill back there.
Yeah, and one other quick special teams point, I'm just curious to see who's going to return punts. It looks like it's probably going to be Miles Bryant, but we talked a lot about Marcus Jones this offseason. Gunnar Olszewski isn't here anymore. I'm just curious to see who returns punts.
Don't remind me. All right. From Gunnar Love on to the mailbag. Some love in here from Ashley on Twitter. She says, we have always have had a tough time winning in Miami. As a Pats fan, what makes you think this year can be different? So, first of all, not a fan, but if you were making a case for the Patriots to win tomorrow, I think you go, it has to be a fast start. Some of those new bells and whistles with the offense come out early. Miami is not prepared, even as an experienced defense led by former Patriots coaches. And then defensively, Tua will throw it up. 16 touchdowns, 10 interceptions last year. And if you're able to keep a lid on that offense and force them to play from behind and dictate terms early, then that is much better than playing from behind, which they did in both games last year.
Yep. All of those points add in the fact that you're going to be playing a rookie head coach who has not called plays at the NFL level because he was the offensive coordinator in San Francisco. But that was Kyle Shanahan's job, Kyle Shanahan's offense. I think there's going to be some growing pains at some point this season. I know Mike McDaniel's kind of a media darling, has been for the last couple of months because of his goofy press conferences and whatnot. And I think he definitely has a lot of talent, but difficult to come in your first game as a head coach against Bill Belichick.
Yeah, and for me, just to rehash two earlier talking points, just contain Tyreek Hill. It was a recipe for success against the Kansas City Chiefs, and if it works against them, it can help you beat the Miami Dolphins. And again, I would say explosive plays. There's got to be an explosive element to the offense this weekend. Keep the Dolphins defense honest. I think they really got to hit on those. It can't just be dink and dunk and running plays.
Also, Ashley, frequent contributor to the NESN.com Patriots mailbag.
Hey,
so
love
that. Appreciate all the questions.
Crossover. She's great. Yeah, and you know what? Sometimes it just boils down. Do you have the better head coach? Do you have the better quarterback? Yeah. And that was probably true the last couple of years, and they lost to Miami anyway. But McDaniel's new, so there's a lot to be learned about him on Sunday as well. All right, last one from Lord Savage of the Dark. Lord Savage, frequent, and
I saw it early.
Okay, we might. I was scared at first. Weird and depressed, but also fabulous. Well, Lord Savage of the Dark.
We all.
Yeah. Why does everyone? Yeah. God. Why does everyone care about the practice facilities? Don't they get the job done fine enough? Look, I don't know if this is the second time or third time that you've covered your favorite team going to a Division II school without a football program playing on lacrosse fields, but it's my first time. So I care about this a little bit, considering we're down here because of them. Now, your second point that it should get the job done fine enough. Clearly, the Patriots think so. We asked this of them this morning. Universally said, ultimately, if you care about, having a more luxurious water station or a real field goal post, maybe that's actually important. Like, you're caring about things that don't matter. If you have white lines and everyone's positioned and you have enough space and time and film, you can practice anywhere. And I think this is just them kind of going in reverse in training camp, where teams used to do this all the time. Go to a faraway college, stay there, and be isolated. They're just doing this now to really lock in on the opener. So I think ultimately, yes, it's probably fine.
Yeah, I mean, novelty is notable. The fact that the Patriots have not done this, it makes it notable. They're practicing essentially at a high school field. It's not a high school, it's a Division II college, but I'm sure some of the players on this team had better facilities at their actual high school.
Especially at prep schools,
Yeah, and if you look back at where the Patriots have done these kind of sleepaway practices, whatever you want to call them, in the past, they were at UCLA 2 years ago. They were at the Air Force Academy. Typically, it's at some sort of college with a real football facility. The fact that an NFL team is practicing at a school that does not have a football program or a football field, that's weird. That's interesting. Again, I don't think it's going to have.
It's weird. It's depressing, but it is a little fabulous there. So it's right up your alley, Lord Savage of the Dark.
Oh, that was fantastic.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I don't think it's going to matter. I think David Andrews today, he was kind of like, what do you mean? It's just another Wednesday practice, even though obviously it's not, given where they are. But I think ultimately it'll be just fine. I think to go back to the Bart Scott quote that you talked about earlier, I agree with you. I mean, calling it a desperation play was a little strong, and he was really sort of playing up like the variable of some of the younger Patriots players, like getting distracted in South Beach. So I don't really buy into all that stuff.
I don't think any of them were taking a 2-hour Uber from Palm Beach, Atlantic, Southeastern Sunshine State, Sailfish University.
SCLSU.
Yes.
But it just, to me, like being there just feels like, I don't want to say that they settled, but it does kind of feel like that. And it just feel like Bill Belichick was going to make this trip happen at all costs, no matter what, even if they had to play in this kind of a setting, which to me just sort of reinforces, how seriously they're taking this game compared to other years.
Yeah, he said there were other options that they looked at, and this was the best one. I would really love to know what those other options were.
Legitimate sandlot.
But yeah, you're totally right. This spoke to how intent they were on finding a place to be in South Florida for this game. Ultimately, I think it's a good move. So if you want to zoom all the way out and skip over the fields and the timing and the facility, whatever, they're at a very nice hotel. I can tell you, every single night being taken care of. They will sleep well. They'll have rooms to watch tape and break down and meet and all that. That's what matters. They're practicing. I think it's fine. But yeah, they wanted to be here. Well, we started with the fields. We ended with practice. They're going to play finally Sunday. We're going to have real football to talk about, not all this theoretical offense. And they might do this, or it should look like that, or Shanahan this. But we've also ended in the dark with the Lord Savage Stark. If you're watching on YouTube, my face has been covered for 20 minutes. Zach and Dakota are getting close as we sit under a cabana outside a pool, and not Del Boca Vista, but Boca Raton. So, guys, thank you so much for coming on. We'll have you back, and hopefully with some more high noons and some more real football as we made it. We made it.
Can't wait. Got a Thursday night kicking off in like 20 minutes.
Yes, we should go.
We should.
Thank you.